I'm Damian Thompson, and I am Global Head of Consumer Insight at Wavemaker. And this is the second in a series of films looking at how the pandemic is changing consumer behaviour, all based on research that we ran in 20 countries during the lockdown. Now, in the first film, I looked at the impact of consumer anxiety on people's purchase journeys and how brands should respond. This time, I want to talk about the new localism that's had a direct effect on people's purchase behaviour. So what happened during lockdown was that our physical worlds shrank dramatically, and the result was a renewed focus on our immediate communities and also an increased recognition of the important social ties that exist beyond our family and close friends that we might normally think of as weak social ties. So what we saw was a turning towards the local community that happened both offline and online. And there are three issues that this raises that I want to address. And the first is the hyper-local disruption that happened in retail. There's been an awful lot, written about the accelerated adoption of e-commerce during lockdown. But alongside that explosion in online shopping and home delivery, there's been a necessary return to local shopping. And these two behaviours are not at all mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. And people reported this local disruption in multiple countries in the research. As independent retailers in their countries, in cities and beyond, innovated to keep their businesses alive during the pandemic, whether that was restaurants and bars repurposing themselves as delis or takeout, or local grocers advertising outside major supermarkets, promoting their home delivery. But what was interesting was the consumer reaction to this. And this is the real threat. The real threat to non-local retailers was the consumer reaction to this hyper-local behaviour. People found that they like the personal approach of patronising the businesses in their community, and also the very personalised services that those businesses are able to offer them. And I think it's a useful reminder that to be human is to be social, and we shouldn't underestimate the importance of these connections that were strengthened during the lockdown. And the second thing I'd like to look at, which is directly linked to this local disruption, is a similar shift to localism online. And what we saw was, in pockets all around the world, the pandemic unlocking the local potential of the internet. I think it's obviously fairly obvious that in the last decade or so, the biggest social media platforms have continued to really thrive and grow. And that was very much at the expense of many of the online community forums that were widespread only a decade ago. And they saw their numbers shrink dramatically. But what we've seen in the last few months is a kind of a re-engagement and new forms of online sociality that subvert this idea of the internet being purely a global phenomenon. And the pandemic has clearly highlighted it's the local potential of the internet and the greater diversity of its use in small pockets around the world. And whether that was most obviously things like neighborhood WhatsApp groups, or local businesses selling their services to local communities, or niche businesses, whether it's cake shops or perfumers, all sorts, offering training courses, any way to connect to people in their immediate community. And the third thing I want to focus on is the challenge that these changes, this localism, presents for brands. Any shift to a more local way of living presents a challenge for big brands because typically they operate at a much larger scale, and they may struggle to be seen to belong or behave appropriately at a smaller community level. And local companies are naturally better placed to operate at this level and to drive behavioural change. So it's an important reminder that brands have never been understood as a global proposition by most consumers because they consume it in a wholly local context. That's where they understand their brands. And there are two things on the horizon that make this local focus likely to persist. The first is, unfortunately, the economic crisis that is brewing in many countries. And the second is the likely persistence of the virus, which we're now seeing with many countries already having second spikes and outbreaks. We're going to have to learn to live with this virus. So it's not impossible for big brands to be seen to be operating appropriately at a community level, but it does require local knowledge and local activation. And I know that a lot of commentators will tell you that people will go back to lowest price and convenience and so on, but not everyone will. New relationships have been built now in local communities, and when those are married to diverse services and better quality, that is a winning combination.